In the week leading up to Easter 2023, Shalada and her family came to stay with us so they could explore Chicago and visit old friends. I thought it might be nice for the boys, Frederick, Sebastian, and Benjamin, to learn a little history about Chicago while they took in the sights. We stopped at the site of the Chicago Portage, discovered by Joliet and Marquette in 1673, an important discovery that led us to the reason for why Chicago was built where it is today. Our modern journey to Chicago was via Metra, the rail line from Naperville. Shalada and Mika could stand in front of the train and see as the train approached Chicago on the shores of Lake Michigan, much like those ancient explorers of yesteryear.
Well, what I want us to 6 and 2 is 8.
When we arrived at Union Station, we took a few moments to explore the grandeur of the station's Grand Hall before we headed out to explore the town. The station exits on the banks of the Chicago River. We made our way across the river on Jackson Street for our next stop, the Sears Tower, now called Willis Tower. When it was built, it was the tallest building in the world. We took the escalator down. Funny how you have to go down to go up. It was time for Shalada and the gang to view Chicago from above. The observation deck, called the Sky Deck, had a number of exhibits. What the heck is Sebastian looking at? Oh, he's on the ledge looking down. There, over 410 meters below him, is the street. The ledge extends 1.5 meters out from the side of the building, giving you a view of everything right below your feet. Looking north, we see the Hancock and Trump Towers, the second and third tallest buildings in Chicago. To the east, looking towards the lake, we get a fantastic view of both Grant and Millennium Park. To the south, we see the Chicago River and the former site of the infamous Chicago Stockyards. It was time for us to make our way down to the lake. In Grant Park, we headed for Buckingham Fountain. It's not until May before they fill and operate the fountain with its fantastic display of water, but we checked it out anyway. From the fountain, we crossed Lakeshore Drive and went down to the Queen's Landing, so named from when Queen Elizabeth II disembarked from her ship here in 1959. We walked along the harbor until Monroe Street. Here we crossed into Maggie Daley Park and across Columbus Drive into Millennium Park on the Serpentine Bridge. The Pritzker Pavilion is a great place in the summertime for concerts in the park. But the star of Millennium Park is Cloud Gate, or better known as the Bean. We took our time here to explore it from all sides.
Back to that same old place, sweet home, Chicago. Oh, come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Back to that same old place.
Another great sculpture is the large LED crown fountain and reflecting pool, which displays pictures of ordinary people. Unfortunately for us, again, it was a little early for the water part of it. Frederick had been looking for a basketball jersey, so we stopped at a sports store on Michigan Avenue. He didn't find what he was looking for, but Shalada walked away with a Bears jersey. We had tickets for the Chicago Architectural Boat Tour. While crossing the Chicago River on the Michigan Avenue Bridge, we could see the long line waiting to board.
By way of the buildings, of course, and in doing so, we'll see the 5 tallest structures in the city of Chicago. Each of those 5 tallest buildings in Chicago is over 1,000 feet tall. Like this building right in front of us, Trump International Hotel and Tower. The building is the second of the 5 tallest structures in the city of Chicago. A town was to build a city within a city that has all of the services a tenant would need. The city within a city has a marina at the base, a retail space, a steakhouse and bar at eye level right there. That curvy rooftop to the back is the top of the House of Blues, a music venue. At the top of the residential, a lot of great buildings. Over 100 years of Chicago architecture right here. That red brick building to our left is 1910, Great Lakes building. This building here to our right is Salesforce Tower, an office building that will house employees of the Salesforce Software Corporation when it opens up later this year, so it's not yet complete. This is the main branch of the Chicago River we're on. This is called Wolf Point. This is where the main branch we're on meets the north branch of the river to the right and the south branch of the river to the left. We'll go down the south branch of the river to today. 1929, Civic Opera Building, Art Deco. See these soaring lines that draw your eye up on this wall here on the left? These lines are created by deep inside windows. And the building has a setback toward the back, toward the top.
Sweet home, Chicago. Oh, come on, baby, don't you wanna know?
Commonly believed to be a 1980s building. Not an 80s building, not a 70s building, built in 1968. When built in 68 was the tallest residential structure on planet Earth. It's still the only tall building along Chicago's lakefront, or in front of us east of this highway toward the lake. Chicago has a long-standing tradition of banning all residential or commercial construction along the lakefront. There's an 1830s ordinance that says the lakefront shall remain forever open, free, and clear. This building got their zoning by claiming they were an industrial facility. They had an industrial dock at their base. So that sneaky zoning loophole is now closed. You'll never see another tall building like that along Chicago's lakefront.
As we sailed under Lakeshore Drive, Navy Pier came into view. The Ferris wheel is a prominent feature of the pier. An oft-forgotten fact, the first Ferris wheel in the world was built in Chicago for the World Exposition of 1893 by Mr. Ferris Jr. That wheel was much larger than our current Ferris wheel. The tour had reached its endpoint. We were all treated to a fantastic view of the Chicago skyline from the lakeside as our boat was turning around.
Chicago.
It was time for lunch, and our tour guide had suggested Portillo's would be a great place for lunch. This struck Shalata's fancy. It was just a few blocks north and west from where the boat docked.
You're waiting up for one more Coke and a couple more.
We settled down to enjoy some hot dogs and chicken with fries and a drink. As far as I knew, Mikhail had only one main request for his visit to Chicago, a hockey game. Our team, the Blackhawks, was not in town, so he settled for a professional basketball game. Scott was kind enough to drive the boys down to the United Center for a Bulls game. It was Benny the Bull Mascot Appreciation Night, and everyone got a Benny bobblehead figurine. The gang had arrived in time to enjoy the pregame activities. We still had more to explore in Chicago, so on our second trip into the city, we walked to Uptown from Lake Street to the Mag Mile along the river. This path also follows Laurel Wacker Drive, our underground expressway across the city. Old freight tunnels run under the city and the river. Built in the 1800s, have now been abandoned. In 1982, a construction accident broke into one tunnel in the river. This caused the basements of all the skyscrapers to flood. The Great Flood of Chicago.
Back to that same old place. Sweet home.
At Michigan Avenue, we climbed back up to street level. Here we stood at the site of Fort Dearborn. The outline of this historic landmark, overlooked by most visitors to Chicago, is only denoted by bronze plaques in the pavement. Built in 1803, before the founding of Chicago, this was the shore of Lake Michigan. Debris from the Great Fire of Chicago later filled in the land between Michigan Avenue and the current lakefront just beyond Lakeshore Drive. Our next stop up the Magnificent Mile, just across the river, is the Tribune Tower. The former headquarters of Chicago's largest newspaper contains many artifacts from all over the world, including several from Denmark. We stopped to give the boys a chance to find some of these.
Baby, don't you wanna know?
We continued up the Mag Mile. Our destination was the Hancock Tower. On our way, we passed the Water Tower, the only structure to survive the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. At the Hancock Tower, we had to again go down to go up. With the Hancock Tower located so close to the lake, it provides an unparalleled view of the lakefront, like this view of the North Shore and the beaches right in the city.
Sweet home, Chicago. Oh, come on.
The Signature Room, one flight up from the observation deck, is a great place to get a drink while looking out over the city. It was time for lunch and to check off another item on Shalata's bucket list, Chicago Deep Dish Pizza. Gino's East Pizzeria was just around the corner from the Hancock Tower. The restaurant had expanded from what both Shalata and I could remember. Plus, they call themselves a graffiti zone. Everyone was invited to sign their walls. It was time to head down to Navy Pier. We walked along the water towards the Ohio Street beach.
Back to that same old place. Sweet home, Chicago.
After exploring Navy Pier, it was time to head back to Union Station. Along the way, we stopped to check out some sights, like the start of the famous Route 66, which runs from Chicago to California. In Davie Plaza, we got a close-up look at the Picasso and then the Calder, and finally the Mercantile Exchange building. The female figure standing 45 stories above the street below depicts Ceres, the Roman goddess of agriculture, in honor of the commodities exchanged in the building below. The statue is faceless because the sculptor thought no one would be able to see it, as he did not think another building would ever be built as tall. I had thought it would be boring for the boys to just sit in the back of the car as we drove around to see more of Chicagoland, so I had provided the boys with some entertainment. The most famous, or should I say infamous person associated with Chicago is of course Al Capone. So we took a trip to Hillside to view his grave.
Back to that same old place.
It was time to check off some more of Shalata's bucket list items. One morning we went out for an American pancake breakfast, and I think the boys were a bit surprised at what they got. But they did a good job finishing off the stack of pancakes with marshmallow fluff and chocolate chips. Shopping was also on her list, although I don't think she had in mind the sports store that I brought them to. Although Benjamin was getting ideas what he could do with this toy. Mostly I took them to visit the Bass Pro Shop to look at the large aquarium with the local fish species. Now Yorktown Mall, on the other hand, was a different story. Shalata and Mika needed to come back here several times. While most of her favorite stores were still there, she did like the addition of the Doggy Lounge. A high point of the trip was a couple of get-togethers with the Ernst family, whom she had lived with for a year. The boys especially liked the man cave, where they could kick back and enjoy some sports on the large screen. We did a walking tour of my town, Naperville. I introduced the boys to geocaching. The 13-stop geocache taught them some history of Naperville, as well as how to use a GPS to navigate. We stopped by the 9/11 Memorial along our Riverwalk, dedicated to Commander Dan Schanauer, who died at the Pentagon on 9/11. Naperville has a number of connections to famous people shown in its artwork around town. The namesake of Naperville comes from Joe Naper, who settled here in 1832, about the same time that Chicago was incorporated. Margie pointed out to Shalata our special doggy bakery, so we had to stop in to check it out. Guinevere Tousley recorded much of Naperville's history. At the end of our tour, it was up to the boys to find my geocache here at the site of Joe Naper's first cabin. With a little extra time on our hands before the stores at the outlet mall were going to open, we took a short trip to Fermilab to visit the bison. We all had to show identifications to be issued our visitor pass in order to enter. There's always something new to learn. On the way out, we stopped at the Education Center. In all the times I've been here, I've never stopped here. I think we were all impressed with the hands-on displays, though. On the way to the mall, I made a wrong turn. On purpose, who can tell? In any case, it gave us an opportunity to stop at the Batavia Creamery. Well, we eventually made it to the mall. Finally, Frederick was able to find his Portland Blazers jersey. During the 10 days of their visit, Scott and Annie had us over for dinner twice. Tessa had a great time mixing it up with the boys. They played cards and a game of pickup basketball.